on again. I'm waiting for the next speaker that will probably be with us very soon. Yeah, here we go. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
How are you this morning?
Wonderfully.
I'm glad you're with us. We have been on it for 9-10 hours now here in Norway, and it has been an interesting day. It's been many good conversations. So I'm glad you're here. And so you are I can't say the word in English.
Computational neuroscientist.
That is so difficult. I was like writing this intro, and it's like there's so many. So I think you need to be in your like industry or business or research area to be able to pronounce all these words. But well, that's what you are, and you're a founder and CEO of Inteon, and your team is working on the first cloud scalable platform for advanced biosignal processing and neural state decoding and brain-computer interface to embedding neurotechnology into everyday life. And now you're going to give us some background and share some slides and visuals with us, so this is easier to understand for us not neuroscientists. And then after this, your presentation here, we will go over to a Q&A that we will talk about this in combination with art and creative expressions as well.
Excited to take you on a little tour through neural interface technologies and brain computer.
So you know how to say it like fast and good. Like this
yeah,
is, you have to like work with this for 20 years or so to be able to do that. Okay, I'm gonna leave you and
perfect. So I'm gonna share my
perfect.
here, and I will exit the display myself just so that everyone can appreciate these slides here, and I'll come back in a moment. So let's do that. Okay. Perfect. So I'm going to speak here on neural interface technologies, the promises, perils, and possibilities for transforming human potential. And in this, I want to sort of give you a bit of a perspective on both the history of neurotechnology, very brief history, as well as some of the emerging exciting opportunities, but also a little bit of discussion on some of the pitfalls and perils, and make sure that we're all collectively thinking about heading in the right path for these technologies. One of the exciting things that we've seen is that in recent decades, we've seen a number of technological advancements that are really allowing us to look into the brain and capture brain activity with unprecedented resolution. And what's been happening in concert with that are advances in computing power and machine learning and AI, and these are enabling us to process these vast quantities of data and really decode the language of the brain, and from that identify mental and brain health states and much more, really. And it's the convergence of neurotech and computers and computation that's really at the heart of neural interface technologies, and this rapidly growing field of brain-computer interfaces that some of you may have heard about. In this slide, what I'm showing you is some examples of current and emerging brain-computer interfaces and their applications. By the way, if there's a little bit of a delay between my voice and what you see on the screen, that's probably due to the way in which Hopin works, but eventually the slide will show. So one of the key applications of brain-computer interface technologies is assistive technology. So this is kind of giving you an overview of really what is a brain-computer interface, right? So there's really more than about 11 million patients in the US that could benefit from an advanced BCI, and that's enabling them to have restoration or augmentation of their function that may be absent due to injury. And of these, around 6 million could actually benefit from a prosthesis to restore movement, communication, vision, or hearing. In the example I'm showing in this video, which may not play super smoothly for you, but there's flickering lights on a display, and this is called an SSVP BCI. It uses brain activity to allow a user to type at a rate of up to 1 character per second by tracking where a user's attending on a screen. And with implants, it's now possible to have full thought-to-speech devices where imagined speech could be translated into text or synthesized voice. We're not quite there yet, but it's coming around the corner very soon. And Eddie Cheng at UCSF has been making some exciting progress on this, as well as many others. This video here is showing Kathy Hutchinson. She was paralyzed in all 4 limbs, and she's using the BrainGate neural implant system to control a robotic arm and take a sip of coffee. This was back in 2012. BCIs can also be used to improve human-AI interaction and to augment cognitive capabilities in healthy humans. So this is an example from Fred DeHay's lab at ISE SuperAero. Here, pilots' brain activity are being recorded while they execute different complicated maneuvers. We're applying a machine learning decoder here to detect whether the pilot is experiencing inattentional deafness to a warning sound. And that's a state where their attention system becomes so overloaded that they actually fail to be consciously aware of and respond to critical issues in their environment. And that information can then be provided to the aircraft to adapt its systems and protect the pilot. Other use cases of this can include detecting mind wandering, mood, stress, cognitive performance, much more. So by tracking these states, we can also gain deeper insights into external factors that influence our cognitive and brain health. What we're showing here, quantified self, quantified health. And in addition to reading these different brain states, with closed loop neuromodulation, information feedback's also provided to the brain to guide it towards the desired states. And that can be provided maybe either through sensory inputs or directly to the brain using electromagnetic fields or ultrasound or other methods. So in this example that I'm showing you here, this person is performing a neurofeedback task where moving objects require him to modulate activity in specific brain networks, which evidence suggests may reinforce those networks through neuroplasticity. And focused ultrasound neuromod is also being used, as shown in this image or this video here, to directly change cortical activity. So there's a lot of interesting new opportunities there for neurotherapeutics. And then finally, brain-computer interface technologies are enabling new forms of creative expression to emerge, new types of experiences in art, where individuals could compose music with their mind or translate their emotional state into beautiful visual representations and much more. And these were actually some of the earliest use cases of BCI technology. We'll discuss some of that later in the talk, but also in the Q&A session, we'll dive into that. I'm going to give you a very quick tour here of some of the history of how this technology came to be and where we are today. This is an extremely fast blitz of this. It all really began back in 1924 with the invention of EEG by Hans Berger. And he actually was driven to find a scientific basis underlying his belief in telepathy. He believed he shared a psychic connection with his sister. And what he discovered were electrical rhythms in the brain that correlated with different mental states. And this came to be known as electroencephalography, the act of measuring these electrical states. Over many years, that technology was refined, the ability to measure electrical waves from the brain. And in the mid to late 1960s, this started being used in the arts. In the earliest brain-computer interfaces, and the concept of biofeedback emerged then, the cybernetic self. And subsequently, in around 1973, the term brain-computer interface emerged through a DARPA project led by Jacques Vidal. And that was trying to develop systems for communication using these EEG technologies, electroencephalograms. The first EEG-based brain-computer interface spelling devices emerged in 1988. And then about 10 years later, we saw the first humans with brain implants for prosthetic control. And the BrainGate system in 2005, that was what Kathy was using in that video that you saw. That emerged around 2005. Consumer BCIs and wearable EEG emerged in the mid to late 2000s. Now the technology getting really small and wearable and usable. And then some more advances in miniaturization with flexible epidermic electronics like tattooable sensors that could record your brain activity. and the first brain-to-brain interfaces demonstrated in rodents by Miguel Nicolelis in 2012. And then just recently, we've seen really an explosion of new technologies further miniaturizing the hardware and capabilities for interfacing with single neurons or small groups of neurons. And then many large companies getting into the BCI field with Neuralink, Elon Musk's company, and Brian Johnson's kernel, Facebook with their famous play in that space, and DARPA's efforts in this area ramping up as well. What I want to show you with this graph is that there's really been an increased acceleration in this space that is moving faster and faster in terms of being able to have both the hardware and the software for interfacing with the brain and accomplishing many of the goals that I showed you in the previous videos. To give you a little bit of perspective of where we were and where we're headed, this is Jacques Vidal's first brain-computer interface in 1973. This occupied an entire room at that time. And one of the powerful things about technology, Mark Weiser famously put it this way, he said that the most profound technologies are those that disappear, they weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. And so this was definitely not woven into the fabric of everyday life at that time. But now, between 1973 and now, these technologies have gotten miniaturized and more powerful. And today, these capabilities and more are achieved by tech that can fit in your hand or be powered through the cloud. So the tech is really disappearing and becoming more ubiquitous and easier to access. This is enabling new possibilities for interfacing with the brain, such as an example here. This is my wife on stage here, actually, and you'll just listen to what she's saying.
Ask Neuroscale for my average relaxation level over the last 5 minutes. Sorry.
Let's hold it up so she can respond.
Your average relaxation level over the last 5 minutes was 36%. Not bad, but maybe you want to try taking a little break?
So what she did is she asked Alexa for her relaxation level, and Alexa was able to query a cloud-based system called Neuroscale that was reading brain activity from a sensor in her ear and her heart activity and movement and translate that into a relaxation metric. As we look into the further future, into 2030 and beyond, there'll be a transition from wearable systems, such as you saw in the previous video, to implanted systems where the tech disappears completely as integrated into our bodies. And this is some of the categorizations of current and emerging neural interface hardware. So some of the major technologies for reading from and writing to the brain are presented. The important thing about this is that precision increases as you go from outside the brain into the brain. So outside the brain, you're listening to like the roar of the crowd, millions of neurons. It's hard, you can't hear any one neuron or even a small group of neurons. As you move into the brain, you can listen to one neuron and interface directly with it if you wish. So for instance, neural dust, a neat technology pioneered from UC Berkeley and Jose Carmena and Michel Maharbiz, allows you to read and write to small groups of neurons powered by wirelessly by ultrasound. But that technology, if further miniaturized, may allow you to interface with many, many neurons. There are other solutions too, such as the neural lace solution that Neuralink is using, and a number of others that are, some of which are shown here in terms of different categories. When we want to measure brain activity from outside the brain, we typically use non-invasive systems like EEG. Those can range from, as shown in this graphic here, from many channel systems that are research grade, kind of big and bulky, all the way down to very few channels. A channel is one electrode, a sensor. And the more electrodes you have, the better you can decode the brain activity and the better you can image the brain. So as you go down to the consumer side of things, the number of electrodes typically decreases, so the power of the device decreases, but there's still useful things you can do with that technology. In the middle there, you're seeing wearable technologies that have suitable density, suitable number of electrodes to extract meaningful information, but are also wearable and wireless and relatively easy to use. These kinds of sensors allow you to do things like image brain activity in real time. Seeing through a glass darkly, it's somewhat fuzzy for sure compared to getting inside the brain, but you can decode relevant neural states from that. So this is an example of something called the avatar experience. It's a fly-through that we created that allows you to fly inside the brain and see your neural activity in real time being imaged using statistical algorithms. And so the flashes of light are your actual brain activity. And as you go into the brain, you can go to an area of your brain and see the activity there shown in this sort of glass brain. And you can learn to control it through neurofeedback potentially. And the pulses of light you see along the fiber tracks here are showing how information is moving between different brain areas using a statistical reconstruction. So these are approximations, of course, of the fine-grained neural activity that you can only see by getting into the brain. But there's more and more that we can extract from these algorithms about what the brain is doing. And one of the really interesting possibilities is to use this technology through neurofeedback or neuromodulation to allow you to gain a deeper insight into yourself or to change brain states. So if we go back actually to the 1960s, to the time when Joe Kamiya was first exploring this triangle that connected mental life with brainwave technologies. He saw a way in which they could combine to give rise with introspective methods to a deeper understanding of the self and a deeper understanding of consciousness. And this was really the birth of biofeedback, which now is known as neurofeedback. And that idea has gone through many different iterations, but at the heart of it is a core idea that our conscious experience is tied, at least in part, to brain states, to our mental experience of the world. Our conscious experience is tied to a physical substrate. If we can change the physical substrate, we can change our conscious experience of the world, and perhaps even allow us to gain access to information that we don't normally have conscious awareness of. And this is well understood by Buddhists and by practitioners of meditation, that by being able to look inside, there are states in inner states that we are often unaware of, that by gaining access to, we can actually greatly improve our ability to operate and act in the world. And one of the exciting possibilities for neuromodulation, not just neurofeedback, but directly changing neural circuits with energy, is to be able to accelerate mindfulness training. And so this is a work here shown by Jay Sanguinetti and Shinzen Yang. Shinzen is a monk trained teacher, very wise individual who has many decades of meditation training. And what they're looking at is really exploring Shinzen's model of equanimity, sensory clarity, concentration, power, and mindful awareness, that triangle, that gives rise to an inner mindful state, and using focused ultrasound neuromodulation to be able to get you faster to that mindful awareness state while you're trying to attain that state. And that's by targeting specific areas in the brain that are associated with introspection and internal awareness, or with ruminative thought, and modulating the activity in those areas. And they've done some studies to show, this is mostly, this shown here is unpublished research, but they've shown in a small cohort there's significant increases in the mindfulness scale of individuals after being exposed to the neuromodulation. And it modulates neural activity in a core network called the default mode network. And we've done some work with Jay to also look at the neuroelectric activity, and we also see that the neuroelectric activity is significantly changed in this default mode network while you are, or after modulating it with focused ultrasound. So this is one of the many exciting ways in which we could think about the interconnection between conscious and inner life and neuromodulation technologies. I'm going to talk more about these topics in our Q&A, but back in the 60s, there was a drive towards a deeper understanding of the connection between spirituality and technology, and in the arts, this gave rise to the concept of spiritual arts. And they're actually thinking that someday we would come upon a sort of a singularity moment, if you will, where as David Rosenboom says here, through the use of computers as appendages of man's brain and methods of learning with biofeedback, rates of information processing will be achieved that approach the speed of light, and ergo conception will be bound less necessarily with action, either elicited or observed, and life will eventually be embodied in information energy networks, creating non-physical art. Spiritual art will be revived as established networks connect us firmly. So this idea of a deeper connectedness between us mediated through neurotechnology was at the very earliest times of neurotechnology's in its birth, really. And they created performances and installations at that time. We'll talk again more about this in the Q&A, that used multiple people, their brain activity with closed loop feedback systems to try to induce deeper connected states. And that's been done now more recently with closed loop neural interface technologies and neurofeedback systems, even having hundreds of individuals in which we've been able to monitor brain activity from and look at the coherences between their brains. So wrapping up in the last couple slides here, as we look into the further future, there's a wide array of new technologies and discoveries that are yet to emerge. And we might even think of Ray Kurzweil's prediction that by 2030, our minds would be connected to the cloud and each other. That many of us in the field think that's a bit of an optimistic prediction, but someday it may be possible that the exchange of information and conscious experience between brains could become a reality. And that could ultimately possibly realize the dream of Hans Berger, who sought this kind of telepathic connection through EEG. The last note I want to make here, if you'll permit me one more minute, Ida, is just a very important point about the possible perils of this. And I know Tristan Harris talked about this earlier. The coming technological advances in this space raise a number of concerns about what sort of future we are creating with this technology. So there's some really serious consequences of a sort of, as Tristan says, the race to the bottom of the brainstem, commoditizing the human mind, strip mining our attention systems. All of those things could be further accelerated through the use of neural interface technologies. And we have to be deeply aware of this possibility and work actively to move away from that possible future. The sort of modernist view of technology as a way of humans exerting their dominion over nature is a false promise for a verdant future. The idea of using technology only as a means for control. Some of our views, as you see here in fiction like Neuromancer and The Matrix, and even, Alita Battle Angel, which was a great kind of empowering story, but also all of these involve the concept of control or power or gaining new superpowers. And while those all may be worthy outcomes to some degree to consider, we should also consider what other possibilities can emerge through this technology. And when we think about dystopia or utopia, there's this middle ground of newtopia, which is that there'll always be some bad and some good in our future. We're not going to probably realize a perfect utopic future. But I like to sort of just point out in my last comment about here, James Cameron's Avatar movie, which really presented two possible worlds, one in which neural interface technology was used to control mechs and do all kinds of, destructive things, but also there's beautiful ideas of using it to create harmony with nature, harmony between ourselves. And this idea of harmonia or harmony, the joining together of one and the many, which goes back to Pythagoras and the ancient Greeks, is something that we have to actively strive to understand. And I believe that introspection, self-reflection, these principles of really understanding better our conscious states and our deeper selves is a goal to understanding harmony and balance, and then learning how can we use these technologies to lead us to a better future, and ultimately to try and leave the world a little better than we found it, which is a wonderful quote by Robert Baden-Powell. And I'll just leave with this slide that is some of the great people and organizations that have been trying to develop standards in neuroethics to help us understand how to leave the world a little better than we left it. And I thank you for your time. And I'd love to follow this more in the follow up on this in the Q&A session. So if you have any more, we'll dive into all this stuff in the Q&A next. And you can contact me for learning resources as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It's really deeply fascinating to hear you talk, and it's if that singularity, moment of singularity, it should be like, a moment of singularity and spirituality together. And if we can really visualize and make it more the inner beauty or the inner connection beauty of the mind, and that could help us connect deeper to, and use technology to connect deeper to what we are as human. So I think we're going to move over to the session with Tim Mullen. And here on the stage, we're going to bring in Larry Brilliant in a second. And so I'll leave and then I'll come back.